Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today will be a little bit different. I'm not going to be reviewing a book so much as using a new book, The Collected Toppi Volume 9, The Old World from Magnetic Press. Thank you so much, Magnetic Press, for finally collecting Toppi's work in English. This is something I've been waiting for forever. I've been buying all these volumes. Me and Sean talked about Toppi a long time ago when we first started this channel, because he's one of the people I wanted to talk about immediately. And then we did a recreation of some of his art, trying to demystify what he does a little bit. And I think I had a revelation recently that helped me demystify both demystify and make me admire his work even more lately. And so I want to use the art in this book to kind of point out those things that have become crystallized for me about his work recently. But I think anyone, who loves art and has seen Sergio Toppi's work is immediately impacted by it. I don't know anyone who could look at this and not be in awe of it, kind of baffled by his skill. You very much get the sense that this is someone who can just absolutely cut loose. I think that's the thing that mystifies everyone about Toppi's work, is it's extremely chaotic looking, but also comes together to make some of the most beautiful, controlled images you've ever seen. And that his work has always baffled me, especially, and I've told this story before, especially the way that he uses his hatching and cross-hatching is oftentimes goes against the grain of what I would think intuitive. The first time I ever saw Sergio Toppi's work was in 2000, I think it was 2000 or 2001. I had gone to the Kubert School at the end of 99, and then dropped out over that summer break, and then so came back home in 2000. And then that summer, I went to Comic-Con with one of my instructors from the Kubert School, Sergio Carrillo, and two of my peers there, Bjorn Hansen and Wendell Illibon. And all the four of us, those two students, myself, and then our instructors, Sergio Carrillo, I'm probably going to mess that up because they're both Sergios, but Sergio Carrillo took us, we shared a room. And I remember one of the nights we came back, and Sergio Carrillo had what looked like yellow phone, like thick, and they were a yellow cover phone book, and I think they were original Italian or something, of translations that he had picked up from some booth of Sergio Toppi work. And he was just telling us how much he loved Sergio Toppi and was showing us the work. And I was immediately just astonished by it, and immediately realized that what Toppi was doing with his hatching, like in moments like this, was not describing form at all. It was not going in the direction that you would expect if you're trying to describe form. And I said, it just looks like his lines are going in all the wrong directions, but it looks right. And I remember going home, the name Sergio Toppi stuck with me. Sometimes you see stuff and you forget the name, but I immediately remembered his name, went home. It was like 2000, so typing in his name on the internet would only produce like little shitty pictures like about this big. And so for years and years, Toppi was like this mysterious figure that I just didn't have access to. And I think in the mid 2010s, Archaea did. I have those books now. I've got them, their versions of The Collector and Shiraz Day. But that was about it. And those I didn't get until the last couple years. So I had seen some Toppi and always been influenced by him and wanted to understand what he was doing, but didn't have access to the work. So very appreciative of these magnetic volumes that are coming out. Just flipping through here while I'm talking to give you a sense. I think everyone knows what his work looks like, but get a sense of what a beautiful job Magnetic is doing, reproducing the work. They're doing the best work they can with the files they're given. I've talked to Mike, I'm gonna blank on his last name, I think it's Kennedy, Mike Kennedy at Neurobellum, who runs Magnetic as well. let me make sure I get, yeah, Mike Kennedy. We've talked a little bit, and he was talking about the files that they got from Mosquito, and so the some of the files like are not the best resources, but in this volume and the majority of the magnetic volumes, you're getting really high quality reproductions of Toppi's art, including a lot of them like this, where the original pencils have been preserved, and then they're printed on a glossy paper, which normally for black and white work, I like it not glossy, but it really works for Toppi, I think, because it accentuates the intensity of his compositions. He's so good at leveraging black and gray and white against each other that having the black really intense, I think, really helps. And then, as always with Magnetic, I really love their production and their style with these hardcovers with the rounded. So, beautiful books all the way through. So all that's to say, go buy the books if you haven't seen them, and to say that Sergio Toppi is someone that has mystified me, and I think mystified a number of artists. You know, the introductions to these books, you're seeing people like Bill Sienkiewicz and Sean Gordon Murphy, and just the Walt Simonson, people that you think are the biggest names, who are looking at this guy and going, God, I don't know how he does it. I wish I could draw like him. So I think about Toppi a lot, and I've tried to mimic him a lot. But I was so obsessed with his mark making, and I always knew the sturdiness of his compositions was part of what he was doing. But I had a revelation recently about part of what makes his art so successful. And everyone talks about his use of shape and negative space and all of that kind of stuff. But I think I've seen an extra factor to what he's doing that I haven't heard people talk about that I want to talk about. So a couple other things that I noticed when I was looking at this. I have always been a little bit hesitant about my opinion on Toppi's color work. I've never thought his stuff works as well in color as it does in black and white. And when I was looking at this volume, I was trying to figure it out. And I'm kind of wondering if Sergio Toppi isn't colorblind. He uses color in very bizarre ways, but it seems like here he's kind of balancing these things out, kind of using it seems very color theory based. And as someone who's colorblind myself, I kind of see some of that's something I would do. So I wonder if Sergio Toppi wasn't colorblind. That's an aside to what I want to say. But another, you look at these, and especially when he gets to skin tone, it's like he can't really see the colors, and he doesn't explore with texture and stuff as much with color either. And he does use intense hints of color very well, but I've just never thought his color work was successful. And another thing that makes me a little bit suspicious is, when he goes to skin tone, they get almost too earth tony. There's not as much life in them. And I don't know, I'm not for sure on this, but I'm speculating. There's moments where he uses color beautifully like this, and beautiful composition, but especially his skin always feels very dead to me, and that's a mistake that I made for a long time as an artist who had color vision problems. In the earth tones, you're not seeing enough of the actual colors in there. You're just seeing earth tones. So I wonder about that with him. But anyways, that's all. To get to the real point of the revelation. So this is a perfect page for one of the things that I realized about Toppi. I was in my backyard and staring at my backyard. The book I'm working on has sequences in it where I'll be drawing outside, and when the character goes outside, I want to take some pretty heavy Toppi influence in terms of composition and mark making, and then trying to add my own little bit to it as well, so it's not just a straight ripoff. But sitting out back looking at the trees, and was mentally flattening them out, and I had a realization in that, and then Toppi's work made sense to me in that moment. That typically since the Renaissance, we've had in Western art a kind of perspectival view on everything, where everything we're trying to represent almost photographically, because they were putting up pieces of glass and tracing them and seeing how the lines converged, and the thing in the back, like the scale shifts and stuff that you would expect if you're working with linear perspective. And that's very different from prior to the Renaissance, where things took on more symbolic and hierarchical scales or things like that. So one of the things I realized, and this is partly thanks to Sean's insistence about always talking about silhouette, is that really what makes Sergio Toppi so good, I think, is that shape and compositional stuff people talk about is Sergio Toppi's as a master of silhouette and icon. And so when you look at his work, like on this page, you're not getting the standard kind of perspective, right? Like these characters are way too small for the boar, and the boar's head's in the wrong position. This is basically like if you turn this into a silhouette, is like a stamp silhouette of a boar. And so he has that going on in the outline. And then that lets him do whatever he wants on the inside. So you get that like in all of his artwork. And each of these characters, if you turn them into a silhouette, they would still be pretty impactful. This character maybe not so much. But if you start stacking, some of the silhouettes like he does, like the hands here on top of this here, it all makes sense. So in doing that, he's appealing to what most people, the way most people view the world, which is use value oriented, which means symbolically oriented. So he's composing symbolically, but then within his compositions, here's another one. You can see when he gets something that is symbolic, he really takes off with it because the silhouette is so great. And then that allows him also to compose on the flat screen. So there's three types of perception that he's juggling. I think in most modern, like realistic art, I think a lot of people, even though it's chaotic, would say Toppi is a pretty realistic artist. The characters, sometimes you think, oh, this guy must be photo referenced or blah, blah, blah. But I'm not sure that they are. So he's able to, you get normally someone who's working realistically, they have like the perspective thing under control, and they have all the rendering stuff under control, like the value rendering, which he has the value rendering. And then they'll use like cross contour and stuff like that to make things feel more three-dimensional, and he'll do that in places and not do it in other places. Like here, the lines are going more where they should go to describe the form. So you have kind of two types of perception that normally work in realistic art, which is kind of the Renaissance view. I guess they go together, really. They're both like a flat screen view of things. You treat everything as if it's on a flat piece of glass or a picture taken by a camera, and you get perspective out of that. And we've mistaken that for being a representation of what it's like to actually be in a place from a perspective and seeing things accurately, which is true if you just freeze frame where you're at. But there's also the kind of sense of being there is a different type of perception that is missed in a lot of art. The textural stuff, the looking around, the air, all of those more subjective impressions of a space. And then there's the cartoon brain, the use value stuff, which is you're walking around and you want to use a door. And so instead of the door with all the details, you just draw like door, the iconic symbol. And so what Toppi's doing, I think, is he's balancing all three of those perceptions. Usually I think you get one or two. You get someone who's a very good cartoonist or something like that, but they're not so good with the realistic rendering, or they're not so good at composing. And so what he's doing is he's appealing to the cartoon brain while also working in the flat screen. But in the flat screen, he's not so concerned about accurate perspective, even though he can do it. He's more interested in just using what's in front of him to create a pleasing jigsaw puzzle of shapes, which is, I think, what people typically notice about his work. But what I think they're missing is that cartoon side of things, that when you look at his work, they read in the way that like symbolism might. And then within those cartoons, he piles on pretty realistic rendering, or at least texture. It's not necessarily accurate rendering of values. Like here, just for compositional purpose, he leaves this totally white. But all of that sense of texture really gives a sense of being there. And then some of the space is recaptured with the weird mark making. The weird mark making that doesn't necessarily describe form. It's oftentimes used to describe value, but not always naturalistically. A lot of times just because he needs a dark shape there. like you can see through here, he just needs dark shapes there. Obviously, these trees would be dark too, but a lot of these bushes would probably be dark, but he leaves them light so that puzzle piece fits together. But there's also within that this kind of undulating quality of like, and this is what I saw in the backyard that really made sense to me, is made Toppi make sense to me, is I could flatten the image out, and so the sky would come forward for a second because the sky is brighter and blue, and the trees are all kind of dark, and for me as being colorblind, kind of muddy too. So it's another thing where I think maybe Toppi, that might be a sign that he was partially colorblind, is he was able to foreground the brighter thing, the sky, and background, that's where his awareness of shape and negative space maybe is so good, is just a guess from my own experience, but I saw the blue come forward and all this stuff became irrelevant. And then my mind started playing the figure ground reversal game where the trees came forward, the sky came forward, and there was motion and movement and stuff, but it wasn't in the typical, like, I'm moving through space way. And so that adds a sense of being there to his work, that just a pure, like, he's got accurate perspective in his drawings in many, many places. But that's always like at a remove. It's always behind the window. It's always behind the photograph. And so he's figured out this other way to create the almost psychedelic sense of being there with all of the textures. Because he'll do stuff like this. This page is full of this kind of stuff where, like here, this is all improper perspective, and it even has a stack, like a stage stack, where this is like a cutout in the foreground, and the typical composition stuff. This is the midground, this is the far, and that's the background. But unlike a lot of other artists, it also flattens, so it can unflatten or flatten, and you can keep doing that with his artwork. And if you flatten it, you just see each one of these shapes in the puzzle piece is also a very pleasing shape, which is typical composition stuff again. But then there's that extra kind of roiling, just designy stuff that he's doing that creates it gets past it, like puts you past the picture plane and puts you back in it in a way that's really interesting. So that's really compelling to me, this combination of like almost iconic cartoon silhouettes filled in with these undulating textures within a flat kind of puzzle piece of a composition. And it's that undulating bit that really blew my mind, and the ability to just get rid of perspective entirely. Like, I think there's many points where Toppi can get rid of perspective entirely. Like here, these are some other examples. This is like really peak Toppi here, where his composition is, is so flawless. And again, like, none of this stuff makes any sense in terms of like actual perspective. This building's totally flat as well. There's no 1 point perspective in any of this stuff. So it's all completely flat, but it still like reads. And, the characters are at different sizes. It's not like hierarchical scale in the Egyptian sense where you're bigger, you're more important. It's just, it doesn't matter. You're kind of, it's also kind of like cubism, you're seeing something from many places in time, and your mind can kind of wrap it all together. So I think that also brings you closer to like real day-to-day experience, because we don't ever freeze anything. Like a photograph, you don't ever have a stable perspective usually, unless you're sitting there doing a plein air painting, and even then you're moving your head around. So it's very rare that in reality you actually get a stable perspective. So he's figured out a way to combine the unstable shifting perspectives in the cubist sense with all of this textural stuff that really gives you the sense of I think textural stuff is that sense of engagement, but when you're engaged in the textural stuff, and this is the mistake I made in my career for such a long time, when you're engaged in all of that versamultitude of representation of detail, you often lose all the rest of the experiential stuff, because you have to stop and freeze and look at reality like it's broken. And Toppi is somehow able to combine all of the different modes of perception into one image. And I just think, that there's this extra little bit, and I don't know if I'm making any sense to anyone. You see it again here too, this almost hierarchical scare where this guy's telling this girl a story, but he's massive because he's like this big adult telling, like, it captures that I guess it's more than three or four modes of perception. He's also capturing like hierarchical or psychological weight, that kids see people as big and authority figures, and the stories they tell are looming. So he's able to just really, I think that's the thing. He's able to integrate multiple, maybe all modes of perception into one image. So he's able to do what most artists do, one or two things. He's kind of doing all at once, and you can see that. I mean, this is a phenomenal drawing. Look at that arm, and he's willing to let abstraction happen too. Like when you're looking at the world and you're focusing on details, it does get abstract, and so he's willing to just like focus on a shape and then come to a really rendered moment. And it's just the balance of all of those elements, like in a composition like this, is phenomenal. I mean, I got really caught up early on about how he produced the textures, how he made certain marks, how he made the decisions about which mark goes what way, and and the shape, the compositions and stuff. But I think there was a lot I was missing in his work, and in all of the kind of watching videos about him and reading about him and reading people's introductions, I feel like a lot of people focus on the composition and the negative space and the mark making, the wildness of the mark making, without talking about the different modes of perception that he's able to juggle very well. So I just wanted to use this new volume to say, if you're not getting these complete Toppi books, you're really missing out on just one of the absolute unassailable masters of illustration, at least. Debatable whether he's a great storyteller or not. He relies on his text a lot. But the combination, which is what comics is, of text and pictures, you always know what's going on. And that also lets him be less, bound to perspective and bound to the typical kind of storytelling mechanics of comics. And that allows him to, again, like if you had all this stuff broken down panel by panel, you'd lose that kind of cubist, multiple perspectives all existing at once. I took like a day's worth of my time and represented it all in one image, rather than kind of staggering it out over panels. So I think there's a lot of stuff like that maybe he's under discussed, at least in my exposure to him. I've watched a lot, but I can't say I'm like a Toppi expert or anything. So maybe I'm saying stuff people have said before, but that was a real revelation to me. It's been really impactful in the art I made. I've posted some of the stuff that I did for the Pareidolia anthology, where it was the first time I really employed that principle in my own work, and I really feel like it was my strongest work that I've made to date. So I felt like sharing that revelation with other people, and I'd be curious to hear what other people see in Toppi that maybe I'm still missing. What perceptual modes is he capturing well? So let me know. But yeah, hopefully that idea is helpful to people in processing his work and getting better at their own work. And then, like I said, if you haven't got these, Magnetic does beautiful work. Mike Kennedy's just doing the really, really, everything they put out over there is great. So support Magnetic. They've always got awesome projects on Kickstarter. Buy the Toppi stuff. It's absolutely essential reading. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel, you enjoy these kind of thorough breakdowns, these deep dives like this, and you want to support us so we can keep doing this kind of stuff, there's two ways to do that. The first is through our Patreon. We have two different tiers of engagement on there. The first tier, you just get early access to the videos. At the second tier, you get to participate in our ongoing webcomic experiment, Pranede. You can help control the story by voting, offering suggestions for what happens next, and then also get some previews of the work, like what I'm talking about, the Pareidolia work and things like that me and Sean are working on. We put up on the Patreon. Not all of it goes up like on our Instagrams and things like that. So more access to early previews of work, things like that. Any of the money we make just helps us buy the books that we review, so that's really great because we can just turn that back into the community and keep this whole thing rolling. So if you want to support Living the Line itself, the best thing to do is support what Sean's doing with the publishing side, Living the Line Publishing. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of his projects now. The Eisner-nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book. Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this, mixed with something like From Hell, when you get into the theories about what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.
You want to see all these books? Smash that subscribe button and the like button and the bell, and then you get them.